Men walking away just shocked society. 0.748, and that is the number that may define the fate of an entire nation. South Korea now has the lowest birth rate in the world, a number so low that it no longer represents decline, but something closer to disappearance. Tonight, we are going to examine why this is happening, who is driving it, and what it means not only for one country, but for the future of modern society itself. Stay with me until the very end, because what we uncover is not just about South Korea, it is about a global shift that is accelerating faster than most people realize. This is not a story about chaos or outrage. It is a story about withdrawal. It is a story about silence. It is a story about what happens when millions of men decide that participation is optional. In South Korea, young men are stepping back from dating, from marriage, from family formation, and from traditional social cooperation with women. They are not protesting in the streets, they are not marching, they are not shouting, they are simply opting out. And that quiet decision may have louder consequences than any public demonstration ever could. South Korea's fertility rate of 0.748 as of 2024 translates into roughly 4.7 births per 1,000 people. For a population to remain stable without immigration, it needs a fertility rate of about 2.1. South Korea is not just below replacement, it is less than half of what is required for stability. This is not a dip, it is not a mild downturn, it is a structural collapse. And when you begin to examine the cultural dynamics beneath that number, a pattern starts to emerge. In recent years, polling data in South Korea has shown that young men have shifted politically and socially in noticeable ways. On issues related to gender policy, workplace equity debates, and social expectations, young men are more conservative compared to their female counterparts and compared to older generations. This divergence is not minor. It reflects a widening gap in worldview. And when two groups in a society begin to view each other not as partners, but as ideological opponents, the most basic social institution, the family, becomes unstable. What makes the South Korean situation particularly striking is the strategy that many young men appear to be using. Rather than directly opposing feminist activism or gender reform movements, many men have chosen what could be described as strict compliance. When certain complaints are raised, they agree. When certain rules are proposed, they endorse them. When boundaries are set, they respect them fully and often to their logical extreme. The result is not reconciliation. The result is distance. For example, concerns about harassment and unwanted advances led to stricter social expectations around how often someone can pursue romantic interest. In a climate where repeated advances can be interpreted negatively, many men simply choose not to initiate at all. They calculate the social and legal risk and decide that abstaining is safer. This creates a dating environment that feels sterile and hesitant. The spontaneous social fabric that once allowed relationships to form becomes cautious and restrained. In the workplace, accusations of bias and gatekeeping prompted many companies to emphasize competition and measurable productivity. Some men responded not by mentoring or bridging gaps, but by focusing exclusively on performance metrics. If the system rewards output and efficiency, they maximize output and efficiency. Emotional support and informal guidance decline. Professional interactions become transactional. Collaboration narrows. In media and entertainment, debates about what is appropriate humor or acceptable storytelling have led to more neutral content. When certain portrayals are criticized as insensitive, producers often respond by removing them entirely. Some viewers then disengage from those programs. The outcome is not necessarily improved cohesion, but fragmentation of audiences and tastes. Cultural spaces become segmented. What we are witnessing in South Korea is not a dramatic confrontation. It is a withdrawal of discretionary effort. It is men choosing to minimize risk, minimize emotional exposure, and minimize long term commitments. They work, they pay bills, They fulfill basic responsibilities, but they do not invest themselves in shared futures in the way previous generations did. Marriage rates drop, birth rates collapse, social participation shrinks to the bare minimum required for individual survival. And here is where the narrative becomes more complex. This pattern is not isolated to South Korea. Across developed nations, there are signs of delayed marriage, declining fertility, and increasing singlehood. In the United States, projections suggest that by 2030, a significant portion of women between the ages of 25 and 44 will be single and without children. The reasons are multifaceted, including economic pressures, career prioritization, cultural change, and evolving personal values. But one recurring factor is that many men are disengaging from traditional relationship pathways. Online ecosystems reflect this shift. Entire digital communities have formed around male self development, finance, fitness, and commentary on gender dynamics. Content creators who once focused narrowly on math, economics, gaming, or investing now frequently incorporate discussions about relationships and societal trends. This is not necessarily antagonistic. Often it is analytical. It is men attempting to interpret the incentives and risks in the current social landscape. The term men walking away has become shorthand in certain circles for this broader phenomenon of disengagement. It does not always mean isolation from society altogether. More often, it means disengagement from traditional expectations such as marriage, fatherhood, and joint economic planning with a partner. It means choosing independence over interdependence. It means prioritizing personal stability and autonomy. In South Korea, there is also the well known 4B movement, in which some women have publicly declared their refusal to date, marry, or have children. While this movement has drawn international attention, it does not fully explain the fertility collapse. Many analysts argue that the larger driver is mutual retreat. When both men and women pull back from the institution of marriage, the demographic math becomes unforgiving. Technology amplifies this retreat. Social media reduces the necessity of face to face interaction. Remote work reduces daily cross gender contact. Entertainment options provide endless distraction without requiring partnership. Artificial intelligence tools, from chatbots to creative platforms, are expanding rapidly. Some young men report forming emotional attachments to AI companions. While this may sound futuristic, the psychological mechanism is simple. If companionship can be simulated without conflict or risk, some individuals will choose the lower friction option. Economic pressure also plays a role. South Korea has one of the highest costs of living relative to income among developed nations, especially in urban centers like Seoul. Housing prices are high. Education costs are significant. Work hours are long. In such an environment, the prospect of supporting a family can feel overwhelming. If a young man already feels ideologically alienated and financially strained, he may decide that remaining single is rational. The same economic calculus appears elsewhere. In many Western countries, young adults face student debt, housing shortages, and unstable job markets. The traditional model of a single earner supporting a family has largely vanished. Dual income households are the norm. But if cooperation between genders becomes strained, dual income cooperation becomes less appealing. The incentive to build together weakens. There is also a psychological dimension. Many men report that solitude brings peace. Without the perceived pressures of dating expectations, social performance, and emotional negotiation, they experience lower stress. They invest in hobbies, fitness, side businesses, or digital communities. They reduce discretionary spending, they save, they trade, they learn new skills. Their lifestyles become lean and efficient. Critics argue that this is an overcorrection and that long term isolation carries its own risks. Human beings are social creatures. Stable partnerships and families historically correlate with higher reported life satisfaction and better health outcomes. But the men making these choices are often not reacting to ideal scenarios. They are reacting to what they perceive as high conflict or high risk environments. They choose what feels safer. In South Korea, the demographic consequences are already visible. Schools are closing due to lack of students. Entire rural towns are aging rapidly. The government has implemented incentives for childbirth, including financial support and housing benefits. Yet the numbers continue to decline. Policy can influence behavior at the margins, but it struggles to reverse deep cultural shifts. The deeper question is whether this represents a temporary phase or a structural transformation. If men continue to disengage from long term partnership at scale, and if women continue to delay or reject traditional family roles, modern societies may need to adapt to smaller populations and altered social structures. Economic systems built on constant growth may face contraction. Pension systems may strain. Labor shortages may intensify. At the same time, new parallel ecosystems are emerging. Decentralized finance communities, skill sharing networks, and localized support systems are growing. Some men focus on cryptocurrency markets, day trading, or remote digital work. Others invest in self sufficiency skills such as gardening, repair work, or small scale entrepreneurship. These activities are not inherently exclusionary, but participation patterns often reflect existing social divides. There are also global dynamics at play. Some men from higher cost countries travel or relocate to regions with lower living expenses and different cultural norms around relationships. They describe feeling more appreciated and less scrutinized. Critics call this avoidance, and supporters call it rational choice in a globalized world. Either way, mobility adds another layer to demographic change. What makes the South Korean case so significant is its speed. Demographic transitions usually unfold over decades. South Korea's fertility rate has plunged in a remarkably short time frame. When a society moves that quickly, institutions struggle to adjust. Education systems, housing markets, labor policies, and healthcare infrastructure also rely on demographic projections. When those projections fail, planning becomes uncertain. It is important to maintain perspective. Not every man is disengaging, not every woman is rejecting partnership. Many couples still form stable families. Many individuals value cooperation and mutual support, but trends operate at the margin. If even a minority chooses to opt out consistently, the cumulative effect can be large. The story, then, is not about hostility, it is about incentives, it is about perceived risk and reward. When the perceived cost of engagement exceeds the perceived benefit, rational actors reduce engagement. If both sides of a social contract feel dissatisfied, the contract weakens. In South Korea, men are often described as fighting magic with magic, meaning they respond to ideological challenges with strict adherence to the principles being demanded. If equality is emphasized, they emphasize equality in all directions. If boundaries are demanded, they respect those boundaries completely. The unintended result is emotional distance, and distance, over time, becomes demographic destiny. A society cannot maintain itself without new generations. When birth rates fall below replacement for extended periods, population shrinks. Economic dynamism slows. Cultural confidence wavers. Governments attempt to intervene, but culture rarely shifts overnight in response to policy. The broader global context suggests that South Korea may be a preview rather than an outlier. Japan faces similar demographic pressures. Parts of Europe do as well. The United States, while younger demographically due to immigration, also experiences declining fertility among native born populations. The underlying themes of economic strain, cultural polarization, and technological substitution recur across borders. So, what does this mean moving forward? It means that the conversation about relationships cannot be reduced to slogans. It cannot be framed purely as blame. When millions of individuals independently make similar decisions to withdraw, something structural is happening. It requires honest analysis rather than caricature. It also means that men and women alike must evaluate the long term implications of short term strategies. If one side prioritizes autonomy without cooperation and the other side mirrors that choice, the outcome is mutual isolation. Autonomy has benefits, so does partnership. The balance is delicate. And to understand how deep this shift runs, we need to step back and examine how South Korea arrived here in the first place. For decades, South Korea was held up as a miracle story. Rising from war and poverty in the mid 20th century, it built one of the most advanced economies in the world within a single lifetime. Its technology companies became global leaders. Its cultural exports, from music to television dramas, traveled across continents. Its cities grew upward and outward with breathtaking speed. Beneath that rapid ascent, however, pressures accumulated quietly in the lives of ordinary people. The model that powered South Korea's growth relied on intense competition. Students competed relentlessly for top university placements. Employees worked some of the longest hours in the developed world. Housing prices in Seoul climbed beyond the reach of many young professionals. Success was possible, but the cost was high. In such an environment, marriage and children became not only emotional commitments, but financial calculations. A small apartment in a major city could require years of savings. Education expenses for a single child could rival the cost of a second mortgage. For young men already navigating military service obligations and demanding workplaces, the traditional role of provider felt increasingly heavy. At the same time, young women experienced their own transformation. Educational attainment among South Korean women rose dramatically. Career ambitions expanded, expectations shifted. Many women no longer wanted to replicate the traditional model in which they stepped away from work after marriage to manage household responsibilities. They sought professional advancement and personal autonomy. On the surface, this seems like a straightforward modernization story. Yet, when expectations change on both sides simultaneously, friction can emerge if cultural norms and institutional support do not adapt at the same pace. In surveys, young South Korean men frequently express frustration that public discourse frames them as beneficiaries of structural advantage, while they themselves feel economically insecure and socially scrutinized. They hear conversations about privilege while struggling with housing costs and job competition. They are told to be more sensitive and more supportive while also being evaluated harshly for any misstep in communication. Whether these perceptions are entirely accurate or partially exaggerated is less important than the fact that they influence behavior. When individuals feel misunderstood or preemptively judged, they reduce exposure to situations where they might be criticized. This is where the concept of minimal participation becomes significant. Many young men continue to fulfill formal obligations. They study, they work, they contribute taxes, but they do not extend themselves beyond what is strictly necessary. They do not volunteer for extra social coordination. They do not take the emotional risks required to initiate romantic relationships. They conserve energy and resources. Over time, that conservation alters the social landscape. Consider the dating market. In previous generations, social circles, workplaces, and family networks facilitated introductions. Today, digital platforms dominate. Dating apps create an environment where first impressions are compressed into photos and brief profiles. Research in multiple countries shows that attention on these platforms tends to concentrate around a small percentage of highly visible users. If a majority of women direct interest toward a minority of men, and if the remaining men receive little to no engagement, resentment can build. Some men conclude that the effort is not worth the outcome. They delete the apps and retreat. When men withdraw from dating, women experience the consequences as well. Fewer approaches in public spaces can be interpreted as indifference. Fewer invitations to socialize can feel like exclusion. Each side interprets the other's behavior through its own lens. Men seek caution and risk avoidance. Women may see coldness or hostility. The gap widens not because of coordinated strategy, but because of cumulative small decisions. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. South Korea's labor market adds another layer. Youth unemployment, while fluctuating, has been a persistent concern. Entry into prestigious companies often requires years of preparation and competitive exams. For men who have completed mandatory military service, the timeline to establish financial stability can stretch into their late 20s or early 30s. By that point, the window for marriage and childbirth, especially given social expectations around age, feels narrower. Some decide to delay further. Others decide not to pursue it at all. Government incentives have attempted to reverse the trend. Cash bonuses for newborns, subsidized childcare, and housing assistance have all been introduced. Yet fertility rates remain low. This suggests that the issue is not purely financial, it is cultural and psychological. If trust between genders erodes, financial incentives cannot fully compensate. Meanwhile, online discourse magnifies extremes. Algorithms reward strong opinions. Content that emphasizes conflict often travels further than content that emphasizes nuance. Young men who feel alienated can find communities that validate their grievances. Young women who feel marginalized can find communities that validate theirs. Each group reinforces its narrative. Offline interactions become colored by online arguments. It is also worth examining the notion of survival orientation. Many young men describe their focus as self-preservation rather than conquest. They speak about fitness, financial literacy, and mental discipline. They track expenses. They invest in digital assets. They reduce consumption. In an uncertain economic climate, this behavior appears rational. But when large numbers of men adopt minimalist lifestyles, consumer-driven sectors feel the impact. Take the restaurant industry as an example. In many cultures, men traditionally spend disproportionately on dining during courtship. If dating frequency declines, discretionary spending declines. Upscale establishments that once relied on couples celebrating milestones may see fewer reservations. Similarly, entertainment venues that thrived on mixed gender socializing may experience shifts in attendance patterns. These changes are subtle at first, but can compound over time. The gym example illustrates another dimension. If men perceive certain spaces as socially tense or uncomfortable, they may choose alternatives. Home gyms, small group training, or specialized clubs can replace large mixed facilities. This does not require hostility. It simply requires preference. Yet, when preferences align across thousands of individuals, entire industries adapt or contract. Artificial intelligence introduces a further twist. AI companions, virtual influencers, and automated services reduce the necessity of human interaction for certain needs. A young man can now receive conversational engagement from a chatbot, entertainment from algorithmically tailored media, and even emotional validation from digital platforms. None of these replace real human relationships entirely, but they reduce the urgency of seeking them out. When friction exists in real world interactions, lower friction digital substitutes gain appeal. The economic consequences of demographic decline extend beyond relationships. Fewer births mean fewer future workers. Pension systems that rely on contributions from younger generations strain as the ratio of retirees to workers increases. Healthcare systems face rising demand from aging populations. Governments can attempt to offset this through immigration, automation, or policy reform, but each approach carries trade offs. In South Korea, military readiness is another concern. Mandatory service depends on a steady supply of young men. As cohorts shrink, maintaining force levels becomes more challenging. The implications reach into national security planning. A demographic trend that begins with individual dating decisions can ripple into defense strategy. Education systems feel the impact early. Primary schools close due to insufficient enrollment. Teachers face reassignment. Universities compete for fewer applicants. Rural areas depopulate as young adults concentrate in cities. The countryside ages rapidly. Infrastructure designed for larger populations becomes underutilized. The visual landscape changes as well as the statistical one. Yet it is crucial not to reduce this phenomenon to a single narrative of blame. Economic modernization often leads to lower fertility regardless of gender conflict. As women gain education and career opportunities, birth rates typically decline. As urbanization increases, living space decreases, and child rearing costs rise. These macro forces operate globally. South Korea's case may be extreme, but it fits within a broader pattern of advanced economies struggling to sustain replacement fertility. The distinctive element, however, is the explicit conversation about disengagement. The language of walking away suggests agency. It suggests a conscious choice rather than passive drift. When individuals articulate their withdrawal as intentional, it shapes identity. It becomes not just a demographic fact, but a cultural statement. In the United States and parts of Europe, similar discussions appear. Young men report higher rates of singlehood than young women. Analysts debate whether this reflects dating app dynamics, economic stratification, or shifting preferences. Some point to the concentration of attention around high status men. Others highlight delayed adulthood milestones across the board. Whatever the cause, the effect is measurable. Marriage rates decline. Age at first marriage rises. Fertility falls. The psychological dimension deserves attention as well. Loneliness has been described as an epidemic in modern societies. Yet, the experience of loneliness is complex. Some men report feeling less lonely when single because they avoid relational conflict. Others experience deep isolation but struggle to re enter the dating world. Women report their own versions of these tensions. The cultural script that once guided young adults from education to marriage to parenthood has fractured. In its place, individuals must design their own path without clear precedent. Financial independence, once framed primarily as a male responsibility, now applies to both genders. Dual income households are common not only by choice, but by necessity. If either partner perceives the other as unreliable or adversarial, cooperation falters. Trust becomes the scarce resource. The narrative that men are creating parallel economies deserves scrutiny. Cryptocurrency communities, for example, attract significant male participation. So do certain online trading groups and skill based forums. These spaces emphasize autonomy, risk management, and decentralized authority. While not explicitly exclusionary, their culture may feel less accessible to those unfamiliar with technical jargon or risk tolerance. Over time, cultural clustering occurs. Similarly, interest in self-sufficiency, from home repair to preparedness planning, has grown among segments of the male population. The motivation often stems from uncertainty about economic stability or institutional reliability. When individuals feel that large systems may fail, they invest in personal resilience. This mindset does not inherently exclude women, but participation patterns can reflect existing social divides. Another factor influencing disengagement is legal risk perception. In some jurisdictions, family law outcomes and workplace misconduct policies are perceived by certain men as asymmetrical. Whether those perceptions align with statistical reality is debated. However, perception drives behavior. If a young man believes that entering a relationship carries disproportionate legal or reputational risk, he may avoid it. Media representation also plays a role. Narratives that emphasize gender conflict can overshadow examples of healthy cooperation. Young audiences absorb these narratives and internalize them. If the dominant cultural storyline portrays relationships as battlegrounds rather than partnerships, enthusiasm declines. At the same time, many couples quietly build stable lives together without engaging in online debates. Their stories rarely trend. They are not controversial. They are not algorithmically amplified. The loudest voices are not always the most representative. Returning to South Korea, one must ask whether the current trajectory is sustainable. A fertility rate of 0.748 cannot persist indefinitely without profound population shrinkage. Over several generations, the population could halve. Cities would contract. Labor shortages would intensify. Economic growth would slow, unless offset by productivity gains or immigration. Cultural identity might shift as demographics change. Some analysts argue that societies can adapt to smaller populations with higher productivity through automation and technology. Robots can assist in manufacturing. AI can optimize logistics. However, social systems such as elder care rely heavily on human labor and emotional connection. Technology can supplement but not fully replace that. There's also the emotional question of legacy. Previous generations often found meaning in raising children and contributing to a lineage. If fewer people choose that path, sources of meaning may shift toward career achievement, creative pursuits, or community involvement. That is not inherently negative, it simply represents transformation. The danger lies in polarization. If men and women increasingly interpret each other as adversaries, cooperative problem solving becomes difficult. Societies function best when different groups perceive mutual benefit in collaboration. When mutual suspicion dominates, withdrawal becomes rational but collectively costly. The future remains uncertain. Cultural trends can reverse. Economic conditions can change. New narratives can emerge that emphasize partnership over conflict. Yet change requires trust rebuilding. Trust cannot be legislated into existence. It grows through consistent positive interaction. In the meantime, the data stands. South Korea's birth rate remains historically low. Marriage rates remain subdued. Young adults navigate a landscape unlike that of their parents. The choices they make today will echo for decades. The lesson from South Korea is not that one gender has defeated the other. It is that mutual retreat carries consequences beyond the immediate emotional relief of disengagement. When enough individuals step back at once, the structure they step away from weakens. If we continue pulling on this thread, we arrive at a deeper layer that often goes unspoken, the transformation of identity itself. For much of modern history, male identity in industrialized societies was tied closely to provision, protection, and participation in a shared national project. A man worked not only for himself, but for a household. He endured long hours because he believed he was building something that extended beyond his own lifespan. When that larger narrative weakens, the motivation structure shifts. Work becomes transactional rather than sacrificial. Ambition becomes personal rather than generational. In South Korea, the speed of economic development compressed multiple cultural transitions into a single generation. Grandparents who grew up in post war scarcity witnessed their grandchildren living in hyper modern cities dominated by digital infrastructure. The expectations placed on young men evolved just as quickly. They were told to succeed academically, complete military service, secure prestigious employment, respect evolving gender norms, and compete in one of the most demanding housing markets in the world. Each expectation may be reasonable in isolation. Combined, they can feel overwhelming. The result for some has been recalibration rather than rebellion. Instead of striving to meet every external benchmark, they narrow their focus. They aim for sufficiency rather than dominance. They reduce social exposure to reduce stress. They cultivate small circles of trusted friends. They limit financial obligations. In a culture that once celebrated collective sacrifice for rapid national growth, this inward turn represents a psychological pivot. Women in South Korea are navigating their own recalibration. Many have entered professional fields in large numbers and achieved academic excellence. They confront workplace challenges, glass ceiling concerns, and the balancing act between career and potential motherhood. Some choose to delay or forego marriage because they do not see a model that allows both autonomy and partnership without disproportionate burden. Others struggle to find partners whose expectations align with theirs. When both sides hesitate simultaneously, stalemate emerges. An important dimension of the stalemate is the erosion of shared narrative. Previous generations often accepted a common script. Education led to employment, employment led to marriage, marriage led to children. Today, that script is optional. Choice expands, but so does uncertainty. Without a default pathway, every step requires negotiation. Negotiation requires trust. Trust requires goodwill. In polarized environments, goodwill becomes scarce. We should also consider the role of status anxiety. In highly competitive societies, individuals are acutely aware of their ranking relative to peers. Social media amplifies this awareness. Images of luxury lifestyles, high performing couples, and curated happiness flood screens daily. For young men who feel they cannot meet these standards, withdrawal can be protective. Rather than compete in arenas where they anticipate rejection, they opt out. This dynamic intersects with economic stratification. In many countries, income and wealth have become more concentrated. If a smaller group of men occupies the highest earning tiers, and if romantic attention clusters around those tiers, the majority may perceive diminished opportunity. This perception can discourage effort in the dating market, even if opportunities exist outside digital platforms. The narrative of scarcity becomes self reinforcing. South Korea's housing market exemplifies this pressure. The price of entry into stable family life appears steep. Without family wealth or exceptional income, home ownership in desirable areas can seem unattainable. Renting may be possible, but long term stability feels uncertain. For individuals already ambivalent about marriage, the financial barrier becomes decisive. There is also a cultural element tied to pride. In societies where masculine identity is linked to financial competence, economic insecurity can translate into relational hesitation. A man who feels unable to provide at a level he deems adequate may avoid commitment rather than risk perceived inadequacy. Cultural expectations of provision persist even as economic realities shift, the gap widens. Technology again plays a subtle role. Remote work and online communities allow individuals to construct fulfilling routines without local engagement. A young man can earn income online, maintain friendships through gaming or chat platforms, and entertain himself through streaming services without ever entering a traditional social venue. The incentive to endure awkward or uncertain interactions declines. This does not mean that digital life is inherently isolating. Many people build meaningful connections online. But digital life reduces dependency on local social ecosystems. When dependency declines, bargaining power shifts. Individuals feel less pressure to compromise. As demographic decline accelerates, governments face difficult choices. Increasing financial incentives has shown limited impact. Expanding parental leave policies helps, but does not reverse trends alone. Encouraging immigration introduces cultural complexity. Investing in automation can offset labor shortages but cannot generate children. Policymakers must confront the reality that fertility is tied not only to economics but to optimism. Optimism about the future is critical. If young adults believe that raising children will lead to stable, fulfilling lives, they are more likely to choose parenthood. If they perceive the future as unstable, expensive, or conflict ridden, hesitation dominates. Surveys in South Korea reveal concerns about work life balance, education competition, and long term security. When optimism declines, fertility follows. The cultural export phenomenon adds irony. South Korean dramas and music celebrate a romance and emotional intensity. They project images of idealized relationships worldwide. Yet domestically, real life relationship formation declines. Fiction and reality diverge. Entertainment thrives, even as family formation stalls. Looking beyond South Korea, Japan offers a cautionary parallel. Japan's fertility rate has remained below replacement for decades. Population decline is already underway. Rural villages empty. Urban centers age. The government implements childcare support and housing subsidies, but cultural shifts prove stubborn. Observers now view South Korea as potentially following an even steeper trajectory. In Europe, several countries face similar demographic headwinds. Southern European nations such as Italy and Spain record low fertility rates. Eastern European countries struggle with youth emigration and aging populations. Each context differs, yet the common thread is delayed or foregone family formation in advanced economies. The United States presents a more complex picture due to immigration and regional variation. However, native born fertility has declined significantly. Marriage rates have fallen. Age at first birth has risen. Cultural debates around gender roles echo those seen elsewhere. While the scale may differ, the direction is similar. One emerging theme is the decoupling of intimacy from reproduction. Contraception, shifting values, and economic priorities allow adults to pursue relationships without necessarily planning for children. This decoupling reduces the automatic link between romance and demographic continuity. When children become an optional lifestyle choice rather than an expected milestone, aggregate birth rates decline. The concept of parallel social spaces deserves further exploration. In many cities, co working spaces, hobby clubs, and online forums cluster around shared interests rather than geographic proximity. Some of these spaces skew male or female. Over time, cross gender casual interaction decreases. Without regular low stakes interaction, misunderstandings grow. Another factor is reputational risk in professional environments. Heightened awareness of inappropriate conduct is positive in terms of protecting individuals from harm. However, some men respond by limiting informal interaction with female colleagues to avoid potential misinterpretation. They adhere strictly to formal boundaries. While this reduces risk, it can also reduce camaraderie and mentorship opportunities. The workplace becomes efficient but impersonal. Economic minimalism among single men has measurable consequences. Studies in various countries show that married men tend to spend more on housing, furniture, and family oriented goods. Single men often allocate resources toward investments, technology, or experiences that do not require large physical spaces. When a substantial portion of men remain single long term, consumption patterns shift. Industries that once relied on family formation adjust or contract. Women also adjust consumption patterns in response to singlehood. Independent living requires its own expenditures. However, if income disparities persist and dual income households become less common, overall spending power may not grow at previous rates. Economic growth models predicated on expanding household formation encounter headwinds. The psychological framing of independence versus interdependence becomes central. Independence offers freedom, flexibility, and reduced compromise. Interdependence offers shared burden, emotional support, and legacy. Modern societies increasingly valorize independence. Yet interdependence is the mechanism through which populations reproduce and cultures transmit. Education systems reinforce individual achievement. Young adults are trained to maximize personal potential. Collective goals receive less emphasis. When personal goals conflict with relational compromise, personal goals often prevail. This is not a moral judgment, but an observation about incentive structures. There is also the matter of time. Raising children requires sustained commitment over decades. In an era defined by rapid technological change and career fluidity, committing to a fixed long term role feels countercultural. The labor market rewards adaptability, parenthood rewards stability. Balancing both can be challenging. Returning to the men who consciously identify with walking away, many describe a sense of clarity. They articulate a belief that societal expectations no longer align with their interests. They prefer peace over conflict, savings over expenditure, solitude over negotiation. They frame their decision not as hostility, but as boundary setting. Whether that boundary ultimately protects or impoverishes them emotionally is a question that only time can answer. Critics argue that large scale disengagement undermines social cohesion. Supporters argue that disengagement is a rational response to perceived imbalance. Both perspectives contain elements of truth. Social systems require participation. Participation requires perceived fairness. When fairness is disputed, participation declines. It is important to avoid exaggeration. Not all men are disengaging. Not all women are rejecting partnership. Many couples continue to marry and raise children. Many workplaces function cooperatively. However, demographic statistics reveal that enough individuals are opting out to alter national trajectories. The interplay between policy and culture remains complex. Policies can reduce financial barriers, but they cannot manufacture desire. Cultural messaging can encourage cooperation, but it cannot erase lived experiences. Trust rebuilding likely requires both structural reform and narrative shift. As automation advances, the labor market may demand fewer workers. Some futurists argue that smaller populations could be manageable if productivity per worker increases significantly. Yet, even in highly automated societies, caregiving and social connection remain human intensive. Robots can assist, but they cannot fully replicate parental care or community belonging. One cannot ignore the emotional cost of prolonged singlehood for those who desire partnership but struggle to find it. Online forums reveal frustration, sadness, and confusion on both sides. While some celebrate independence, others quietly long for connection. The public narrative often simplifies these experiences into caricature, but reality is more nuanced. If current patterns persist, the next decades may see societies adapting to lower birth rates through urban redesign, restructured pension systems, and revised work life expectations. Family units may become smaller and more diverse. Community support networks may need strengthening to compensate for fewer siblings and extended relatives. The story unfolding in South Korea is therefore both specific and universal. Specific in its cultural context, universal in its underlying themes of economic pressure, technological substitution, and shifting identity. The number 0.748 symbolizes more than fertility. It symbolizes a moment when collective continuity becomes uncertain. The question remains whether this uncertainty will catalyze renewed cooperation or entrench separation. History shows that societies can reinvent themselves. Cultural norms evolve, incentives change, yet reinvention requires recognition of shared stakes. There is another dimension that deserves careful attention, and that is the concept of social leverage. In every society, relationships between groups operate on a balance of perceived value and necessity. When one group believes it cannot function without the other, it concedes influence. When it discovers that it can function independently, the dynamic shifts. What we are observing in parts of South Korea and increasingly elsewhere is a recalculation of necessity. Many young men no longer believe that marriage or long term partnership is essential to personal survival or even personal fulfillment. That recalculation changes the bargaining table entirely. For much of the 20th century, economic structures reinforced interdependence. A single income often sustained a household. Domestic labor, childcare, and social coordination were distributed along predictable lines. While this model had inequities, it also created clear mutual reliance. As both men and women entered the workforce in large numbers, financial interdependence decreased. Two adults could sustain themselves independently. The practical requirement to marry diminished. When necessity declines, choice expands. When choice expands, standards rise. And when standards rise beyond what most can meet, participation drops. In South Korea, the educational arms race illustrates this phenomenon vividly. Parents invest heavily in private tutoring and supplemental education to secure competitive advantages for their children. The pressure to provide such opportunities can discourage potential parents from starting families at all. If raising one child requires extraordinary financial and emotional investment, the threshold for deciding to have that child becomes higher. Some couples delay until they feel fully prepared. Others conclude that the preparation will never feel sufficient. Young men watching this landscape may calculate that remaining single eliminates a series of escalating expectations. Without the prospect of funding elite education, managing extended family obligations, and securing expensive housing, their financial burden lightens considerably. They can live in smaller spaces, relocate more easily, and take professional risks without dependence. The opportunity cost of commitment appears high. Simultaneously, many young women assess the same environment and question whether partnership enhances or complicates their ambitions. If they anticipate carrying a disproportionate share of domestic labor, even while working full time, they may hesitate. If workplace cultures penalize maternity, they may prioritize career stability over motherhood. The result is symmetry and hesitation, even if the motivations differ. One cannot ignore the role of delayed adulthood milestones. Across developed nations, the transition from adolescence to stable adulthood has lengthened. Individuals spend more years in education. They experiment with different career paths. They postpone home ownership. Marriage and children move further into the future. Biology, however, does not adjust to these timelines indefinitely. When the window narrows, fertility statistics reflect it. Another aspect shaping this shift is the evolution of entertainment and leisure. Previous generations often socialized in mixed gender settings as a primary form of recreation. Today, immersive digital entertainment offers compelling alternatives. Gaming communities, streaming platforms, and niche hobby groups provide satisfaction without requiring traditional dating rituals. Leisure no longer serves as a gateway to partnership by default. The language surrounding relationships has also evolved. Terms emphasizing boundaries, emotional labor, and personal space dominate discourse. These concepts are valuable in promoting respect and mental health, yet, when interpreted rigidly, they can discourage organic interaction. Individuals may fear that casual mistakes will carry disproportionate consequences. The safer route becomes minimal engagement. In South Korea's corporate culture, long work hours historically limited time for family life. Government initiatives have sought to reduce overtime and promote work life balance. However, cultural expectations often persist beyond formal policy. If employees still perceive that career advancement requires exhaustive dedication, they may deprioritize family formation. A man who believes that fatherhood would compromise his professional trajectory may delay or avoid it entirely. We should also examine the psychological effect of witnessing divorce and marital conflict. Younger generations grew up observing the strains their parents endured. High profile legal disputes and contentious separations circulate widely online. If the perceived downside of marriage includes financial loss, emotional distress, and public embarrassment, risk aversion increases. Even if many marriages are stable, the visibility of negative outcomes shapes perception. On the other side, women observing unstable or unequal marriages may internalize caution as well. They may insist on higher standards of compatibility, financial stability, and shared values. When both sides elevate criteria simultaneously, fewer matches occur. The dating pool narrows not because of demographic shortage, but because of heightened expectations. An often overlooked variable is health and well being. South Korea, like many advanced societies, faces rising rates of stress related conditions among young adults. Mental health challenges can make relationship building more difficult. When individuals are focused on managing anxiety, depression, or burnout, dating may fall low on their priority list. Addressing mental health holistically could indirectly influence demographic trends. Urbanization compounds these pressures. Mega cities concentrate opportunity, but also intensify competition and isolation. Living in dense environments does not guarantee community. In fact, anonymity can increase. Neighbors may not know each other. Social networks may remain fragmented. Building a family without extended support nearby becomes daunting. The cultural conversation about masculinity also factors in. If traditional masculine roles are criticized without being replaced by coherent alternatives, some men experience identity confusion. They are told what not to be, but not always what to be instead. In that vacuum, withdrawal offers simplicity. It removes the need to navigate shifting expectations. Similarly, debates about femininity and empowerment influence female choices. If empowerment is framed primarily in terms of independence from men, partnership may seem secondary. If empowerment is reframed to include collaborative strength, perceptions could shift. Cultural narratives matter. The interplay between state and individual becomes visible here. In some discourse, the state is positioned as a substitute provider for services once delivered within families. Childcare, elder care, and financial assistance programs expand. While beneficial, this can subtly alter perceptions of mutual necessity between men and women. If both believe that institutional support can replace spousal support, the incentive to pair for practical reasons weakens. Economic resilience among single men has been documented in certain metrics. Lower household expenses and focused saving habits can produce financial stability. However, long term social resilience requires more than financial metrics. Societies depend on intergenerational transfer of knowledge and care. If fewer children are born, the burden on each future worker increases. There is also the geopolitical dimension. Nations with shrinking populations may experience reduced influence globally. Workforce shortages can constrain economic output. Innovation often correlates with youthful demographics. Countries competing in technology and manufacturing may find demographic decline a strategic vulnerability. South Korea's unique security environment heightens these stakes. Positioned near a heavily militarized border, it must maintain readiness. A smaller population affects conscription pools and long term defense planning. Demography intersects with national strategy in ways that transcend personal lifestyle choices. From a philosophical standpoint, the question emerges whether modernity inherently erodes fertility. Historical data suggests that as societies become wealthier and more educated, birth rates tend to fall. Children transition from economic assets in agrarian economies to economic investments in urban ones. When raising a child entails significant cost without direct financial return, families opt for fewer children. South Korea may simply represent the leading edge of this global pattern. However, the added element of explicit gender disengagement intensifies the trend. When individuals consciously frame withdrawal as a statement or strategy, it becomes self reinforcing. Identity solidifies around independence. Reversing identity driven decisions is more challenging than adjusting economic incentives. We must also consider the potential for technological augmentation of reproduction itself. Advances in fertility treatments and reproductive technology could extend biological timelines. Yet, technology cannot create desire. It can only facilitate existing intentions. If intentions remain low, technological capacity will not dramatically alter outcomes. Community design may hold part of the answer. Societies that facilitate affordable housing, accessible childcare, and flexible work arrangements tend to maintain relatively higher fertility compared to peers. Nordic countries, for example, often sustain rates closer to replacement through supportive policies. Yet, even there, rates have fluctuated downward in recent years, suggesting that policy alone is insufficient. Cultural optimism and trust appear to be decisive variables. When young adults believe their society supports families and values their contributions, they are more inclined to participate in its continuation. When cynicism dominates, participation wanes. The men who articulate walking away frequently emphasize peace as their objective. They describe an environment they perceive as adversarial and choose distance over confrontation. Whether that perception is accurate across contexts is less relevant than its behavioral consequence. Perception shapes action. For women experiencing the same environment differently, the narrative may focus on autonomy and self protection. They may interpret male withdrawal as avoidance of accountability rather than risk management. Misaligned interpretations deepen division. Bridging this gap requires dialogue that transcends online echo chambers. It requires acknowledging legitimate grievances on both sides without reducing complex dynamics to caricatures. It requires rebuilding small scale trust through consistent positive interactions. Demographic trends unfold slowly relative to news cycles, but quickly relative to generational memory. Within one generation, South Korea moved from rapid growth to population contraction. The speed suggests that cultural tipping points can be reached abruptly. Looking ahead, societies may experiment with alternative family structures. Cooperative housing arrangements, shared parenting networks, and community based support systems could supplement traditional nuclear families. Innovation in social organization may mitigate some consequences of low fertility. Yet the fundamental reality remains that population replacement requires births. Without them, numbers decline, economic systems adjust, cultural traditions evolve, political priorities shift. The South Korean example forces other nations to confront uncomfortable questions. Are current incentive structures aligned with long term continuity? Are young adults confident enough in the future to invest in it through children? Are men and women sufficiently aligned in expectations to build together? The answer at present appears uncertain. Many are choosing to invest inward rather than outward. They pursue self improvement, financial independence, and controlled social environments. These pursuits are rational in isolation. Collectively, they alter demographic destiny. As artificial intelligence continues to reshape labor markets, the calculus may change again. If automation reduces economic pressure and increases leisure, some may reconsider family formation. Conversely, if automation increases insecurity and job displacement, hesitation may intensify. Cultural leaders, educators, and policymakers must grapple with these intertwined forces. Simplistic explanations will not suffice. Neither will assigning blame to one gender or another. The issue spans economics, psychology, technology, and identity. In the end, demographic decline is not merely about numbers, it reflects how individuals feel about their society and about each other. When mutual confidence erodes, continuity falters. South Korea stands at the forefront of this transformation. Its experience offers both warning and opportunity. Warning that disengagement can accumulate into national consequence. Opportunity to rethink structures in ways that restore shared purpose. Whether other nations heed that lesson remains to be seen. For now, the trajectory continues, shaped by millions of quiet decisions made in apartments, offices, and digital spaces across the country. If we push even further into the structural layer of this phenomenon, we begin to see that what is unfolding is not merely about romance or even about gender. It is about incentive architecture. Every society operates on invisible reward systems. Behaviors that are rewarded increase. Behaviors that are punished decline. Over time, populations adapt not to speeches or slogans, but to the lived pattern of reward and consequence. When forming a family feels economically punishing, socially risky, and psychologically draining, fewer people pursue it. When remaining single feels stable, controllable, and financially efficient, more people adopt it. South Korea's hyper competitive economy has, in many ways, optimized for productivity rather than reproduction. Companies reward long hours and measurable output. Universities reward test performance. Housing markets reward early capital accumulation. None of these systems are designed primarily to support early family formation. They are designed to maximize economic competitiveness. The unintended effect is that family life becomes a secondary objective rather than a central one. Young men internalize this reality quickly. They observe that professional advancement requires relentless focus. They see that even minor career interruptions can have long term consequences. They conclude that adding the complexity of marriage and children could compromise their upward mobility. Some choose to delay. Others choose to abstain indefinitely. Young women internalize a parallel calculation. If they anticipate that motherhood may limit career progression or reduce earning potential, they may delay as well. If they do not encounter partners who share domestic responsibilities equitably, hesitation increases. When both genders evaluate the same structural pressures and arrive at protective decisions, demographic contraction becomes the byproduct. The concept of opportunity cost becomes central. Every hour devoted to childcare is an hour not devoted to career development, self improvement, or leisure. In previous eras, that trade off was accepted as part of a broader narrative of legacy and duty. In modern individualistic cultures, opportunity cost is scrutinized more intensely. Individuals ask not only what they gain, but what they sacrifice. When sacrifice appears too high relative to perceived reward, participation declines. There is also the influence of delayed gratification culture. Financial literacy content encourages saving, investing, and compounding wealth over decades. Minimalist lifestyle movements encourage reduced consumption and independence. These philosophies often resonate strongly with young men navigating uncertain economies. Marriage, by contrast, can appear as an immediate increase in expenditure and obligation. The contrast between compounding assets and compounding responsibilities becomes stark. We should examine the psychological shift from collective identity to personal branding. Social media encourages individuals to curate their own narratives, achievements, and experiences. Identity becomes individualized and portable. Marriage, however, requires merging identities and prioritizing shared goals. In a culture that valorizes self expression and personal optimization, merging can feel constraining. South Korea's intense educational pipeline also shapes expectations around child rearing. Parents invest enormous time and money into tutoring academies to secure competitive advantages for their children. Prospective parents observing this environment may feel intimidated. The prospect of raising a child without subjecting them to relentless competition feels unrealistic. Some conclude that opting out spares both themselves and potential children from stress. Another element shaping male disengagement is the perception of declining reciprocity. In many narratives circulating online, young men express the belief that traditional expectations of male provision persist while traditional appreciation for that provision has diminished. Whether this perception is universally valid is debatable. However, belief drives behavior. If a man believes his contributions will be undervalued or scrutinized rather than respected, he may redirect his effort toward domains where feedback feels clearer. Women, conversely, may feel that emotional labor and career sacrifices remain underrecognized. If they believe that partnership entails disproportionate burden, they too may redirect energy inward. Mutual dissatisfaction fuels parallel withdrawal rather than confrontation. The legal and institutional environment can further influence risk perception. Family law structures, custody norms, and workplace policies vary by country. Even rumors about outcomes can shape decisions. If individuals perceive that entering marriage exposes them to significant financial or reputational vulnerability, caution intensifies. Transparent and balanced legal frameworks are essential to maintaining trust. The economic ripple effects of declining marriage rates extend into housing markets. Smaller household formation reduces demand for large family units while increasing demand for single occupancy apartments. Urban planning must adjust accordingly. Infrastructure built for growing populations may become underutilized. Public transportation systems, school networks, and healthcare facilities also rely on demographic projections that can quickly become outdated. In labor markets, a shrinking youth cohort can paradoxically increase wages due to scarcity, yet it can also constrain economic growth by limiting workforce expansion. Businesses may automate or offshore functions to compensate. Productivity gains may offset some losses, but cultural vitality often correlates with youth presence. Innovation ecosystems thrive on fresh entrants. Another overlooked aspect is elder care. As populations age without proportional younger generations, caregiving burdens intensify. In traditional family structures, adult children often assist aging parents. With fewer children, and with many remaining single informal care networks weaken, the state must expand services or risk gaps in support. The global dimension complicates matters further. Countries experiencing demographic decline may compete for migrants from nations with younger populations. This can alleviate labor shortages, but introduces integration challenges. Cultural cohesion must be maintained amid diversity. South Korea historically has been relatively homogeneous, making large scale immigration a sensitive issue. From a cultural standpoint, narratives around success and fulfillment influence choices deeply. If fulfillment is portrayed primarily through career milestones, travel experiences, and personal hobbies, family life may appear secondary. If cultural leaders highlight the intrinsic rewards of parenting and partnership, perceptions may shift. Media representation matters. The digital ecosystem amplifies extreme cases. Stories of conflict, betrayal, and dysfunction attract attention. Stories of stable, cooperative families receive less engagement. Algorithms prioritize content that provokes emotion. This can distort perceived norms. Young adults may overestimate the prevalence of negative relationship outcomes and underestimate the stability of the majority. In South Korea, military service adds another layer to male life planning. Mandatory service delays educational and career timelines. Upon return, men may feel behind female peers who advanced uninterrupted. This can create tension in dating markets where age and income expectations intersect. The symbolic aspect of walking away also deserves attention. For some men, disengagement becomes a form of protest without public confrontation. It signals dissatisfaction without direct conflict. It is quiet resistance. However, quiet resistance can evolve into permanent separation if not addressed. It is important to note that demographic decline does not inherently signal moral failure. Some societies may adapt to smaller populations gracefully. Quality of life could improve if resources are distributed among fewer people. Environmental pressures may ease. The challenge lies in managing the transition without economic or social instability. The pace of change remains critical. Gradual decline allows systems to adapt. Rapid decline strains adjustment capacity. South Korea's sharp drop places it in a more precarious position than countries experiencing slower trends. Another variable is intergenerational dialogue. Older generations may struggle to understand younger adults' hesitations. They may emphasize duty and sacrifice, while younger cohorts prioritize mental health and autonomy. Bridging this generational gap is essential for crafting policies that resonate. The role of religion and cultural tradition also influences fertility. In societies where religious participation declines, fertility often follows. South Korea has experienced secularization trends similar to other developed nations. Without strong pronatalist cultural norms, individual preference dominates. Technology's evolution continues to reshape intimacy. Virtual reality, immersive gaming, and advanced AI companionship may reduce perceived loneliness for some individuals. If simulated interaction becomes sufficiently satisfying, the drive for real world partnership may weaken further. While such technology cannot replicate full human connection, it can reduce immediate discomfort. Economic decentralization through remote work may alter geographic patterns. Individuals can relocate to lower cost regions, reducing financial pressure. This could, in theory, make family formation more feasible. However, if cultural hesitations persist, lower costs alone may not suffice. We should also consider the psychological concept of learned helplessness. If individuals repeatedly encounter rejection or perceived unfairness in dating or professional contexts, they may internalize the belief that effort is futile. Withdrawal becomes protective. Restoring confidence requires positive reinforcement experiences. Public discourse often oscillates between alarmism and dismissal. Some commentators declare impending collapse. Others minimize concerns as temporary cycles. The reality likely lies between extremes. Demographic decline poses challenges but not inevitabilities. Policy innovation and cultural recalibration can alter trajectories. Education about relationship skills and conflict resolution may be one practical intervention. Many young adults have limited exposure to models of healthy partnership. Integrating emotional literacy into education systems could improve relational outcomes over time. Another promising avenue involves workplace reform, flexible schedules, equitable parental leave, and supportive corporate cultures can reduce the perceived incompatibility between career and family. When both men and women feel supported in balancing responsibilities, hesitation may decline. Housing affordability remains central. Without accessible pathways to stable housing, family planning stalls. Governments must address supply constraints, zoning regulations, and speculative investment patterns that inflate prices beyond young adults' reach. Healthcare access, particularly around reproductive services, also influences decisions. When prospective parents trust that medical support is available and affordable, anxiety decreases. Comprehensive family support systems can gradually rebuild optimism. Cultural storytelling can play a transformative role. Narratives that depict partnership as mutually empowering rather than zero sum may shift perception. Media creators, influencers, and community leaders hold influence in shaping these narratives. At the heart of the issue lies trust. Trust that one's partner will contribute fairly. Trust that society will support families. Trust that the future holds opportunity rather than scarcity. Without trust, long term commitments feel precarious. South Korea's experience underscores the fragility of demographic stability in advanced economies. Rapid modernization delivered prosperity, but also intensified competition and individualism. The challenge now is to reconcile economic dynamism with social continuity. If men continue to recalibrate towards self contained lifestyles, and if women continue to prioritize independence amid structural pressures, demographic contraction will persist. However, recalibration is not irreversible. Cultural evolution can occur in multiple directions. The coming decades will test whether societies can design systems that honor autonomy while encouraging cooperation. It will require nuanced dialogue rather than polarized rhetoric. It will require acknowledging legitimate concerns without vilifying either gender. Ultimately, the number 0.748 remains a stark data point, but behind it lie millions of personal stories, calculations, hopes, and hesitations. Demography is destiny only if incentives remain unchanged. If incentives evolve, destiny can shift. For now, South Korea stands as a case study in what happens when modernization outpaces relational adaptation. The world watches, analyzes, and debates. The decisions made today by young adults will echo across generations. As we bring this to its final stage, we need to step back from the data, the policies, the commentary, and look at the core truth beneath it all. Civilizations are not sustained by economic output alone. They are sustained by belief, belief in the future, belief in each other, belief that sacrifice today leads to something meaningful tomorrow. When belief weakens, participation weakens. When participation weakens, continuity falters. South Korea's demographic collapse is not merely a technical policy failure, it is a crisis of confidence. Young men do not wake up deciding to withdraw from society out of random impulse. They calculate, they observe incentives, they measure risk, they watch cultural messaging, they assess whether the return on emotional investment is worth the cost. Many have concluded that it is not. That conclusion may be right or wrong in the long run, but it is powerful in the present. The same is true for young women. They are not rejecting partnership out of chaos or confusion. They are responding to lived realities, workplace structures, cultural narratives, and personal ambition. When both genders independently arrive at self protective strategies, the result is demographic contraction. What makes this moment historic is the speed and the scale. Never before in human history have so many individuals had so many alternatives to traditional family formation. In agrarian societies, children were economic contributors. In early industrial societies, marriage was economically stabilizing. In modern digital societies, survival does not require marriage. Technology allows individuals to function alone at a level that would have been impossible in previous centuries. Food can be delivered without leaving an apartment. Entertainment streams endlessly. Income can be generated remotely. Companionship can be simulated digitally. Advice and validation can be sourced from global communities. The friction that once nudged people toward partnership has been reduced. That reduction changes everything. For men who identify with walking away, the choice often feels empowering. They describe reclaiming time, reducing stress, and building financial reserves. They emphasize peace, they emphasize autonomy, they emphasize clarity. In their narrative, disengagement is not defeat, it is strategic retreat from a battlefield they no longer wish to fight on. But strategy always has long term consequences. When large numbers of men disengage from marriage and fatherhood, society loses not only births, but also the stabilizing influence that long term family responsibility often provides. Married men historically exhibit lower crime rates, higher earnings, and greater civic participation. While single men can and do contribute positively, widespread disengagement alters social patterns. On the other side, women navigating prolonged singlehood encounter their own realities. Independence can be fulfilling, careers can be rewarding, but biological timelines remain unchanged. If partnership is delayed too long, fertility windows narrow. Many women may later desire children, but find fewer available partners who meet their criteria. Regret becomes part of the conversation, though it is rarely amplified online. The uncomfortable truth is that both sides may be optimizing for short term stability at the expense of long term continuity. Men optimize for risk avoidance and financial efficiency. Women optimize for autonomy and career security. Neither optimization inherently prioritizes population replacement. This is not about assigning fault, it is about recognizing misaligned incentives. When a system consistently produces outcomes that undermine its own sustainability, that system must evolve. The question is whether evolution will occur through deliberate reform or through unavoidable consequence. Economic systems built on continuous growth assume stable or expanding populations. Pension systems assume younger workers will support retirees. Healthcare systems assume generational balance. When birth rates remain below replacement for decades, those assumptions break down. Governments must either raise taxes, cut benefits, increase immigration, or restructure entire frameworks. South Korea is already confronting these dilemmas. Rural areas are emptying, schools are closing, businesses struggle to find workers, the military considers adjustments to conscription, urban planners rethink infrastructure needs. These are not theoretical debates, they are active challenges unfolding in real time. Globally, observers are beginning to recognize that South Korea may be a preview rather than an anomaly. Japan's long stagnation, Europe's aging populations, and declining fertility in the United States all point in a similar direction. Technology accelerates change faster than cultural adaptation can keep pace. One of the most significant shifts underpinning all of this is the redefinition of meaning. Previous generations often derived meaning from building families and contributing to community continuity. Modern culture increasingly locates meaning in personal achievement, travel, experiences, and digital identity. None of these are inherently negative, but they do not inherently produce children. If meaning is individualized rather than generational, demographic decline follows naturally. A society must actively cultivate narratives that connect individual fulfillment with collective continuity. Without that connection, the incentive to reproduce weakens. Another factor rarely discussed openly is fear of future instability. Climate change concerns, geopolitical tensions, and economic volatility influence young adults' outlook. Some question whether bringing children into an uncertain world is responsible. Whether that fear is proportionate or exaggerated, it shapes decision making. We also cannot ignore the cultural feedback loop created by declining births. As fewer children are visible in public life, parenthood becomes less normalized. Young adults grow up with fewer siblings and cousins. Social networks shrink. The idea of having multiple children feels abstract rather than natural. Decline reinforces itself, yet decline is not destiny. History shows that demographic patterns can shift when cultural and economic conditions align. After periods of hardship, birth rates have rebounded in certain contexts. The key variable has often been renewed optimism and supportive infrastructure. To reverse a fertility crisis, societies must make family life both aspirational and feasible. Aspirational means culturally respected and celebrated. Feasible means economically and structurally supported. Both conditions must exist simultaneously. For men who have disengaged, rebuilding trust will require more than rhetoric. It will require clear signals that cooperation is valued and protected. For women who hesitate, it will require evidence that partnership does not demand disproportionate sacrifice. Policies alone cannot create trust, but they can signal commitment. Technology, ironically, may both contribute to and alleviate the crisis, while digital substitutes reduce the urgency of real world interaction. They also enable flexible work arrangements that could make parenting more manageable. Remote work can allow fathers greater involvement. Automation can reduce household labor. The same tools that encourage isolation could, if directed intentionally, support family integration. Cultural leadership matters as well. Influencers, educators, and media creators shape perceptions. If dominant narratives emphasize conflict and competition between genders, division deepens. If narratives highlight collaboration and shared goals, perceptions can gradually soften. At the individual level, the decision to walk away feels rational within a certain framework. At the collective level, millions of rational individual decisions can produce irrational societal outcomes. This is the paradox of modern individualism. Personal optimization does not always align with communal sustainability. South Korea now stands at a crossroads. It can continue along its current trajectory and adapt to long term population contraction, or it can attempt to recalibrate incentives and narratives to encourage renewed participation in family life. Neither path is simple. Both require honest assessment. The broader world would be wise to pay attention. Demographic decline rarely announces itself with fanfare. It unfolds quietly, year after year, through incremental choices. By the time its effects are undeniable, reversing course becomes more difficult. Men walking away is not merely a slogan, it is a behavioral trend with measurable consequences. It reflects a deeper shift in how men perceive risk, reward, and responsibility in modern societies. Women recalibrating expectations is equally consequential. When both recalibrations align toward independence rather than interdependence, the social contract transforms. The question that remains is whether this transformation leads to a stable new equilibrium or to prolonged contraction and fragmentation. Can societies design frameworks where autonomy and family life coexist harmoniously? Can trust be rebuilt in environments shaped by digital polarization? Can economic structures reduce the perceived penalty of raising children? There are no simple answers, but ignoring the issue will not make it disappear. Demography does not negotiate, it responds to behavior. As we close this discussion, reflect on the scale of what we have examined. A single number, 0.748 comma, represents millions of individual decisions. Each decision made quietly in private spaces, each shaped by personal history, economic context, and cultural narrative. Together, those decisions shape the future of a nation. What we are witnessing in South Korea may be the early chapter of a broader global shift. Whether it becomes a cautionary tale or a catalyst for renewal depends on how seriously societies engage with the underlying incentives. So I want to ask you directly, what do you think about what we discussed? Do you believe this is a temporary correction in modern culture, or are we witnessing a permanent restructuring of relationships in society? Do you agree that men walking away is reshaping demographics, or do you see other forces as more decisive? Leave a comment and share your perspective. These conversations matter because the future is built on the choices we make today. Yeah, like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.